Most of you already know Lydia. She's been a member of the PPS for a number of years now. And before all that, she spent about 30 years or so as a science and environmental journalist, author, speaker, and teacher. That included 10 years as a Trent University instructor, teaching a classroom and online course on environmental communications. She got into photography in around 2004 because of the digital revolution in cameras. And she quickly became interested in wildlife shooting. And that's one of the most challenging photographic genres, I would imagine, because I don't do it myself. And she succeeded in that exceptionally well. I think that her most memorable moments in photography would have occurred during her photo trips across Canada and abroad. But tonight, though, she's aiming her lens at a more local area. She's going to be talking about shoreline locations on the Great Lakes that are accessible. So she's talking about Lake Ontario, Lake Huron, and Lake Erie. And I'm really looking forward to this because I think this is just the kind of inspiration we all need to get out and take more photos. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Lydia Dotto.
Okay. Okay, so this is called Great Lake Shores. And the reason I had this idea was simply because, people aren't traveling during the pandemic the way they did before. So I decided to focus on some sites that were within reasonable driving distance from Peterborough that might provide some good shooting opportunities in 2021, especially during the spring and summer and fall. These sites offer a great mix of scenic sites for landscape photography and a very wide variety of wildlife. I should mention that a lot of these places have been affected by restrictions related to the pandemic. So obviously you should check to see what conditions are in effect if and when you decide to visit them. So I'm going to be talking about the North Shore of Lake Erie, the North Shore of Lake Ontario, and the Georgian Bay Circle around Lake Huron. I should just mention also that this is by no means an exhaustive tour of every possible site. There are just far too many. So this is a personal selection of places that I have found photographically productive over the last 5 years or so. Some are well-known places, and I know that a number of you have visited some of these sites. Others are less well-known. And I just hope that I will be able to provide something useful for everybody. Because these places are on the lake shore and have a wide variety of ecosystems, including beaches, marshes, and woods, birds are the most common form of wildlife that show up in these places and are often the prime attraction that draws people from all over the world. But there are a bunch of other interesting critters as well, which I will talk about as we go along. Just wanted to mention that the Great Lakes are on two of the major bird flyways in North America. And the two bisect Lake Erie, actually. So we get this huge influx of migrating birds in the spring and the fall, literally tens of thousands of them. And also many of these species nest in these areas of Ontario. So there are good opportunities to observe them raising their families during the summer. And some of these locations are the most southerly parts of Canada. So very often you will find species there that just aren't that common further north. Most of the locations are provincial or national parks or conservation areas, and they often host a variety of different nature and wildlife programs, tours, citizen research activities, etc. They're also major sites for research and conservation and banding programs. So it's worth checking to see what might be going on when you plan a visit. I'm going to start with Lake Erie. Three of the locations on Lake Erie: Long Point, Rondeau, and Point Pelee. This map, I will be showing approximate driving distances from from Peterborough, but that assumes directly from Peterborough to that location. Obviously, this would be a situation where you could actually spend a week and go to all of these locations. Lake Erie, as I mentioned, is bisected by two of the flyways, which roughly fall in this general vicinity. So right around this area here, you get a mix of the two flyways. It's not a hard and fast border, but you do get two groups of them. All three of these locations are classified as important bird and biodiversity areas, which is an international scientific designation for conservation of bird populations. And so it supports research and conservation efforts to protect threatened and endangered species. Pelee is, of course, the most well-known, but and things get pretty crazy there in May. But the other two sites offer very similar conditions and shooting opportunities, and I think they're a little less busy, and they're also a closer distance from Peterborough, but they have been advertising those other areas as well. So, you know, during the peak of the season, you're probably going to encounter some crowds. So I'm going to start with Long Point Provincial Park. And also there's two other areas that are actually national wildlife areas. This one is called Big Creek National Wildlife Area, and this is the tip of Long Point, and that's the Long Point National Wildlife Area. So you have a collection of marshes, woods, and beaches. Most of these places will allow for activities like camping and fishing and kayaking and canoeing and all kinds of things. This whole area is, in addition to being an IBA, an important bird area, is also designated as a World Biosphere Reserve. And you get tens of thousands of migratory birds coming in. There's more than 300 species of birds that come in the spring and the fall, and more than 80 of them nest on the point. So this is really a top birding location in North America. So we'll start with the provincial park, which is Long Point. So you have trails through the wooded areas and marshes, and the marshes often have these raised lookouts, partly because it's very difficult to see, particularly as the summer goes on, it's difficult to see over the reeds. So a lot of them will build these lookouts so that people can see over them. These are some of the birds that I was able to photograph in Long Point. I was particularly glad to get the red-headed woodpecker, because this is considered to be in Ontario, is an endangered, in Canada, it's considered an endangered species. They estimate there are less than 6,000 in the country. And so it is considered to be relatively rare. Its populations have been declining. The other two birds are much more common. One is a songbird, a house finch, and the other is a palm warbler. They both belong to a classification called perching birds or songbirds, and that's basically defined by their toes. Their toes facilitate perching. So that's how they're defined, and they account for over half of all birds. Few more that show up in this location: the rose-breasted grosbeak, the tree swallows, and the ruddy turnstone. The turnstone is a wading bird, a water bird, and unfortunately this one wasn't in its breeding plumage. It's really good to get them in the breeding season, because usually they're far more colorful at that time of year than they are at any other time of year. However, I found that the most common form of wildlife in the park is bird photographers. And unfortunately, their populations are increasing and their status is not endangered. So the Long Point Bird Observatory is the oldest bird observatory in the Western Hemisphere. It's open to the public during spring and fall migration. And they have bird banding demonstrations, and they do monitoring, research, professional training, and public education. They have in front of the banding station, they have a list of birds that have been reported seen in the vicinity. And they're part of a Canada-wide migration monitoring network and involved in banding. So you'll be able to see the nets. These are called mist nets. That are set along the trails as you walk along the trails. And they also do As I mentioned, they do banding, so they go out to collect the birds from the nets, and they will do tours. They will bring people along, let them observe the process and the banding as well. So that's something you might be interested. It is quite an interesting process, and so if you're planning to go to a place like this, it might be worth checking out what they're offering in terms of banding tours. The Big Creek National Wildlife Area is just a little ways up the road from the Long Point Provincial Park. It's definitely worth a visit. It has two high tower lookouts overlooking an extensive marsh. So again, these ones are actually two-story towers, so you get way up above the reeds, which is very helpful. So that tower is right here. There's another one over here. So this one's good for shooting in the morning. This one's good for shooting in the afternoon. And you can walk all around the marsh. So there's a lot of different shooting opportunities. As with any marsh, it's good to get to them in the spring before the reeds have grown too tall, because after that, usually you can't really see anything, although the towers do help. And they have, sometimes they will clear some areas of reeds in the front so that you can continue to see what's going on in the marsh. Some of the birds I saw there, the sandhill cranes flying overhead. During this time of year or the fall, we see them around this area in the fields as they're getting ready to migrate south. But in the spring, they nest in wetlands. So this would be a prime area for them to be nesting. The pied-billed grebe is quite an interesting little bird. We don't see it much up in this area, but it's an aquatic diving bird, and it has actually 12 different names, including hell diver and water witch. So I guess it has some kind of a personality problem. And the moorhens are, they belong to the rail family. They're ground belt dwelling birds, often found in wetlands. Rails are really, really tough to find, and the moorhen is probably at the better end of accessibility than some of the other ones. The Long Point National Wildlife Area. So this is the park here, and this is the point out here. And so this is what it looks like on the Google Earth maps. It is only accessible by boat. There's no paths or roads or anything up there. So you can book boat tours in Port Rowan, which is just over on the mainland over here. It's a fairly long ride. It's about an hour and a half each way. And I was very fortunate to have a perfect day for this trip, because these trips do tend to get canceled quite frequently for bad weather. And you may, if you're thinking about you might want to do this, you might want to plan to stay for a couple of days, because I think the standard procedure with a cancellation is a rain check rather than a refund. So you often have to try to wait for a better day. So when you get to the point, there's a lighthouse there, and out on the end of the spit, you have a sand beach with many birds flocking there. And then you have a wooded area through the middle of the region with trails through there, where you again you would see typically the songbirds in there. There is a beach with sand cliffs, and they do have bank swallows. You can sort of see them there. They're a threatened species. They're very hard to shoot, especially in flight. They're very quick and erratic flyers with making sharp turns because they catch insects in the air. And of course, their brown color is kind of designed to blend with the sand. So these are not commonly seen around this area here. So that's something to look for. Long Point also has there's another bird observatory there. So it has a research and banding station. And so this is a bird captured in the nets. And so it requires special skills to extract them from the net. And you can go into the banding station and they will show you the banding procedures. And you can actually stay, there's a cabin where people can stay overnight or for a couple of days if they want to participate in some of the research programs that are going on there. So if you're really into birds and things like that, then this might be an interesting opportunity for both photography and for education. I just wanted to mention that up in Port Rowan, which again is the town just at the entrance to the park, is the headquarters of Birds Canada, which is a nonprofit research organization. They run the observatories and they do support a number of research projects of different kinds. They do have a visitor center over here, and they have a big backyard with a marsh and some trails through the woods and that. So this is also another site that you could stop to see what might be available for shooting. They did have an interesting take on social distancing during the pandemic. They were asking people to stay 1 crane length apart because the cranes are roughly 2 meters or 6 feet. So that's just about the right size, assuming that people know how big cranes are, which I'm not sure everybody does. The next one is Rondo Park. We're moving west now down Lake Erie. This is an old growth Carolinian forest with an extensive coastal wetland. So you have a lot of wetland area in here and a number of trails. You've got 11 kilometers of sandy beaches. There's camping, hiking, biking, canoeing, fishing. They have a flight festival in the spring migration. There's 6 trails, all classed as easy. 3 are quite short, about less than an hour or less, and 3 are longer, ranging from about 2.5 to 6 hours in length. But they are all classified as easy walking. So this is the Marsh Trail, which goes down along the waterway there. And so you have open access to the lake, and this is a very long one. It's about 7 kilometers all the way back down there. You can see there's a tower down there, and but you don't have to go all the way, of course. And most of it is flat, level, well groomed, and that, so it's easy to walk. But this is sometimes closed because of flooding when they've got high water levels on the lakes. There are a bunch of these little lookouts that are right on the lake, where it provides good access to the water so that you can see the waterfowl going by. And actually this place had a little pond. I guess it was really just spring flooding, but it had a little pond in this area here that was absolutely full of these American toads. And they were making an enormous racket and kind of going crazy. So I figured they were either mating or fighting or both. But they certainly put on a very interesting demonstration. This is one of the shorter trails. This is a 1.2 kilometer trail, a 1 hour walk, easy. It's the shortest trail. It's called barrier free, which means that they basically anybody of any accessibility status can go along these trails. It goes through a mature Carolinian forest that has some trees that are quite rare in Ontario, such as the tulip trees, hence the name, and the sassafras and the shagbark hickory tree. Of course, this was in the spring because I was mainly interested in the birds. So the trees hadn't leafed out yet, because that, of course, is pretty much the death of bird photography when the trees get full of leaves, because then you can't see anything that's in them. Just another example of these lookouts that they have. There's a lot of marshy areas and boggy areas with a variety of wildlife and plants. The majority of this trail is boardwalk for handicap accessibility. So this is a really accessible area for anybody of any ability. The migrating songbirds and the waterfowl in the spring and fall are the features here. There's about 334 species of birds recorded in the park, and about 134 have been recorded breeding. This is quite a southerly location, so the number of rare species will often show up. And there's a lot of tundra swans that come to this area as well, which are not all that common around other places in Ontario. And on to Peely, which of course is the most famous birding site in Ontario. It attracts birders from all over the world. Um, so you have again hiking, biking, canoeing, kayaking, but it's really all about the birds. Um, you get the standard mixture of beaches, woods, and marshes. There are 8 trails through the wooded areas. Most are short. Um, the tip is accessible by land, unlike at Long Point. During the off season, October to April, you can actually drive up to this area here and then walk. During the height of the season, you can't drive, but there is a shuttle bus that will take you to this area, and then it's about a 6 or 7 minute walk to the tip. So this is the shuttle bus that will carry you out there, and this is the trail out to the end of it. They have this sign here that says 42, which basically marks the 42nd parallel, which is as far south as Rome and Barcelona. And because this is the most southerly point in Canada, you get some of the rarest plants and animals are found here because the climate is different from most of the rest of the country. At the tip, there's mostly the interest is waterfowl. So you will see things like the horned grebe and the red-breasted merganser, a bunch of other types of waterfowl. The horned grebe is only in Ontario during the migration period. It's not native to the province at other times. And again, you get a variety of different songbirds, warblers, as well through the wooded areas. The barn swallows are actually fairly rare. They like to make their nests in human-built structures like barns and other things like that. So there's a pavilion, an open pavilion there where there's dozens of them that make their nests there. They're a threatened species in Ontario, and they're not all that common to find. So this is actually a really good site to shoot them because of the fact that they have a structure there that is really designed for their nests. It is very dark in there though, so it's an enormous challenge to get good shots of flight. They're very fast, and so combination of low light and fast flying is pretty much a disaster. But you can get very good shots of their nesting as well there. And there's also a marsh boardwalk, and this is a 1 kilometer, 45-minute walk. It has a very high tower with telescopes on top. Marshes are really tough for shooting because they provide so much hiding area for the birds. You know, you can be like 3 inches away from them and you won't even know that they're there. So one of the things that they do is always try to give you an opportunity to elevate above the reeds. So they have these elevated boardwalks through there and these smaller towers along the boardwalk. And they have this resting area where you can just kind of sit there and wait for the birds to come to you. I generally don't have that much patience, but this is one strategy. And then just north of Pelee, so this is Pelee Park here, just north of it is a thing called the Hillman Marsh. It was kind of a gray day when I got there, so it's kind of a washed out type of thing. This is a continuation of the marsh environment that you have further south, and they have trails throughout the park. They do get a lot of marsh, shore, and field birds, including some rare species. And they have built a photographic blind right on the marsh, which is really nice because you know you can go in there and generally speaking, the birds won't pay too much attention to you. They control the water levels so that they can create mud flats, and this does give good photographic opportunities. So we're going to move on to the Georgian Bay on the east side of Lake Huron. I'm going to focus on 3 main areas. Killbear Park, which is near Parry Sound, driving north to Killarney Park, and then across Manitoulin Island, and then down to the Bruce Peninsula. This was the route that I took. The hours that are listed here are again sort of direct driving times. Obviously, if you're going to do a loop like this, it's going to take a few days. Kilbear Park was a provincial park just west of Parry Sound. This was one of my favorite spots. This was sort of classic group of seven territory. I loved the landscapes here, but the weather wasn't great, although sometimes these moody, cloudy days can, they have their own appeal. But I would like to go back in better weather and visit this place again. So it's about a half-hour drive. This is Parry Sound, so it's about a half-hour drive from Parry Sound. It's a very forested area through this part here, but you also have access to the shoreline all along this area. There's camping, hiking, biking, sailing, and windsurfing. And I just love these rocky shorelines. They have these flat, rolling pink granite rocks. They're actually fairly easy to navigate. It's not too difficult to walk, but they have to me, a lot of photographic interest. I just found this whole area to be quite fascinating. As you're walking along the shoreline, you do have some sand beaches mixed in among the rocky shoreline areas. And you have a lot of these rocky outcrops and islands with the classical windswept trees. Again, these are images that we've seen from paintings for much of Ontario's history. You get the iconic pines bent by the winds that were memorialized by the group of seven paintings, and you get the Georgian Bay sunsets as well, although again, I had gray cloudy days while I was there. I should mention that one of the reasons why Killarney was made a provincial park was that the painters that belonged to the group of seven persuaded the Ontario government to make it a park. One of the things I really enjoyed is that the rocks were covered with these extremely colorful and varied lichens, all kinds of different shapes and sizes and colors. And I spent quite a bit of time taking close-up shots of these structures, which I found quite fascinating. Decided to take advantage of being so close to the thousands of islands in the Georgian Bay. There's 30,000 of them. There is actually a national park at the south end of this group of islands down near Honey Harbor, but I was up in Parry Sound, so I took a boat tour out of Parry Sound. You can take one that's about 2 hours in the morning that goes on this route, or you can take one that's about 3 hours that also includes this route as well. And it goes around all these little islands in there. Again, a cloudy day. I think I would have preferred a nicer day, but it was really fascinating to see all these islands, all sizes of them, just tiny little clumps of a few rocks and a few trees to quite large islands. And you were just, the whole sort of structure of it was quite interesting. It really is a test of composition as you're driving along or riding along on the boat and you're moving and you're trying to figure out the best way to frame the shot so that you're getting all these different structures in a certain location. Quite a few of these little inukshuks or rock cairns on some of the rock outcroppings there. There was quite a tight passage among a number of islands. The boat would get quite close to the rock faces, and this was also quite interesting because there was a lot of structure in the rocks and a lot of color. So it did provide a lot of interesting photographic opportunities. And you got quite close. The boat doesn't go very fast, so it's not impossible to get good shots from the boat. A lot of private islands with cottages in this area. So you did see signs of life on some of the islands. So then the next step was taking Highway 69 up to Killarney. And this is an area that is not only known for, if you're interested in rocks and rock faces photographically, this is a really great area to drive. It is a major highway and there is a shoulder so you can pull over, but it's not, you don't have a lot of room, so you need to be really careful. But there's a lot of really interesting rock faces along here. And of course, you also get this highway became quite famous for these inukshuks or rock cairns along this route. Some of them are very high up on the cliffs, and I wondered how people got up there to place them. There was a lot of controversy about this. There was, these Inukshuks initiated with the Inuit, and they used them as navigational tools and as messaging centers. And so there was a lot of discussion about this phenomenon of just putting these rocks everywhere in Ontario being a form of cultural appropriation. But actually, in Killarney Park, the park officials were begging people to stop building them because they actually use rock cairns to direct people along the trails. And they were worried that these rogue cairns were going to send people astray. And in Killarney Park, you do not want to get lost. So they were really begging people not to put these things up. But they are there, a lot of them, and they are photographically interesting. So, and this is one of the prime locations for this sort of thing. So you get to Killarney, and again, it's very similar in many ways in its look and feel to Killbear. It features this smooth, weathered pink granite rocks interspersed with water pools. I just find this type of environment really, really pleasant and interesting to shoot. It's a huge park, of course. A lot of it is just pure wilderness. There's about 50 lakes in there. And as I mentioned, the group of 7 persuaded the Ontario government to make this a provincial park. So there's a lot of backcountry canoeing, kayaking, camping, hiking trails, and in the wintertime, cross-country skiing and snowshoeing. Lake George, which is fairly accessible. This is the main road. This red line is the main road through there. So this is the road here. So you can get access to the beaches there, and there's trails all around this area and canoeing in this area as well. And you can get yurt accommodation year round in this area. It has 6 trails and ranging from 2 to 80 kilometers. Can't even imagine 80 kilometers. Most are considered moderate to difficult to strenuous, and you really need to be in good shape to go on most of these trails. It's very rocky terrain through old growth forest with a lot of bogs and swamps in there. This was one of the trails, one of the moderate trails. I personally did find it quite difficult because it isn't really a trail. It's just you're climbing over rocks, up and down rocks. It's very rough going. Extremely dense forest. You can see the trees are close together. And sometimes you can't even tell that there's a trail, although of course they do flag them with this little marker things. But it's very dark. The canopy is virtually 100% over. So it's very dark for photography in there. You do see a lot of interesting plants as well in there. And so it is certainly an interesting environment, but it is quite challenging. And this is probably the easiest of the trails in there. I much preferred this trail, and I can't really pronounce it. It's Chikanishing, I think, which is a 3-kilometer trail considered moderate. It winds along the park's southern boundary and you have a couple of small ridges of rocks, and then you get right down to Georgian Bay. And again, it's typical of the rocky windswept terrain of Georgian Bay. I found walking on these smooth rocks to be fairly easy. There are places where you have to be really careful. Again, there's not really a defined path. But they're not too steep. And of course, this is a much more open area, better light. And on a better day, you would have a nice blue sky and more popping colors. But this was a really lovely environment that I really enjoyed. So when we left Killarney, you had to go back all the way to the highway and then up to Sudbury, and then along the Trans-Canada Highway, and then down to Manitoulin. And we didn't spend too much time in Manitoulin, but I did stop in this Kagawong area to see the Bridal Veil Falls. And so stop there and then down to the south coast to get the ferry to the Bruce Peninsula. So these are the Bridal Veil Falls. small but very pretty, and they had a extensive trail system along the Kagawong River into the town. So you can walk along the river. There are some rapids a little further down the river. A very picturesque place that provides a lot of kind of landscape opportunities. So on to the South Bay mouth to get the ferry to the Bruce Peninsula. So it goes across to Tobermory on the Bruce Peninsula. It's about a 2-hour ride on the ferry. Um, and you get into Tobermory. I should just mention before I get on to the Bruce Peninsula National Park, there is a something called right outside of Tobermory. There's a place called 5 Fathom National Park, which is the underwater park where they have a lot of sunken ships. And this is a place where a lot of divers go. So if you're into diving and photographing while you're underwater, that's really a good place to go. So this is in the Bruce Peninsula National Park along the coastline. I was fortunate that when I got there, the weather had improved and it gave me beautiful blue skies and enough light to highlight the beautiful colors of the water. It was really, the watercolors were really amazing, very beautiful. You'll notice here that unlike the other side of Georgian Bay, where the rocks were all smooth and flat and kind of rolling, here we have much more rugged, craggy sort of rocks, a very, very different look and feel to the other side of the bay. So here we were in Tobermory, and we went to this area here, the Grotto Caves. So you get, this is the parking area here, and you have trails through this forested area alongside of these lakes, and you can get to this Grotto Caves area, which has a rock pebble beach. There are trails up along on the top of the cliffs, which are actually quite difficult, but they're actually part of the Bruce Trail. And the cliffs are quite high, overlooking the water. So from the parking lot, this is the kind of path that you have going through. It's a good solid path, not paved exactly, but quite well groomed, going through the forested areas. And there's also, this is an area where there's a lot of interesting plants as well. So you should keep an eye out for different types of plants that you are really seen only in this area. We don't see them around here. It's about a 20-minute walk from the parking lot to the cliffs at the lake shore from here. So people do climb down the cliffs into this, they call it a cave, but it's not, it isn't really a cave. It's a grotto, and it has this very shallow pool area here, which during the summer people go swimming in or bathing or dabbling your feet or whatever. So you can get down here. This gets very, very busy in the summertime. And actually, although the park was open in 2020, because of the pandemic, they felt that they could not control people keeping their proper distances. So people were not allowed to climb into the grotto during 2020. Up on top of the cliffside, you have these really ragged, rugged areas up here. You can walk along here. As I said, this is part of the Bruce Trail, but it is quite treacherous, and some people were climbing right out on the ledges of the cliffs, which I wasn't brave enough to do. But it certainly is a very rugged area up there, and it provides extremely scenic views out over the bay. If you're in the area, you should probably take a quick look at Singing Sands, which is over on the other side from the Bruce Peninsula Park. This is a bog area with a boardwalk. So this is the parking area over in Bruce Peninsula Park. And so it's about a 16-minute drive over to Singing Sands, just over on the other side. And there's a bunch of different things there. There's beaches and there's walking trails all around out in this area here. But this area here there's a boardwalk through here, and it's a through what's called a rare fen and dune ecosystem. And this is where you can see some interesting plants, including a number of carnivorous plants. This is an area known for orchids, and there are some other rare plants that are found only in the Great Lakes region. So it's fairly easy walking. The boardwalk is certainly easy, and the trail that goes off in this direction is also easy walking. And of course, there's a beach area as well for swimming for people who want to do that. And so these are some of the plants that you see. This is a pitcher plant. This is a yellow lady slipper orchid and an Indian paintbrush. And as I said, there's a number of, I'm not a big plant person. So if I had been better prepared, I would have been looking for some of the rarer species. And again, this is an area I probably want to visit again. So now we're going down to the bottom of Georgian Bay, the south end of Georgian Bay, Wasaga Beach. And the only reason I'm mentioning this is, and this is, if you're driving straight there from Peterborough, it's about an hour and a half. The only reason I'm mentioning this is because this is a really great location if you're interested in a bird conservation program. This is the piping plover, which is an endangered species in Canada. In fact, it was extinct in Ontario for about 3 decades until they started returning to Wasaga Beach from the US about in 27. And these are small shorebirds, and they basically like to live on the beach, sand and gravel beaches. So this is a location where you can watch and photograph their life story unfolding throughout the spring and the summer. They arrive around April, and they start claiming territory and mating and nesting and just kind of getting ready to set up their households. The nests will sometimes fail, or even if they don't fail, they might have more than one nest per season, depending on the conditions. So Birds Canada runs a protection and conservation program at several Ontario sites, including Wasaga Beach. So once the birds start building their nests and laying their eggs, the volunteers and the staff for Birds Canada will take these wire cages out and enclose, well, they are actually called exclosures because they're intended to keep out predators. They don't keep the birds in, but they will keep minks and gulls and raccoons out. And this is to protect the birds and the eggs, to give them a fighting chance at survival. They will often close off parts of the beach as well to minimize human interference. And people going through or taking in off-road vehicles or whatever, swimming, picnicking, whatever. They did do this during 2020. Initially, they couldn't get in there when the birds first arrived because everything was shut down for the pandemic. However, about just shortly before the beaches opened up again, they were allowed to go in and put these exclosures in, but they had to adapt the procedures. You can see here you've got 4 people working on this, so they had to reduce that to 2 people in order to maintain proper distancing, and they all had to wear masks and use hand sanitizers and everything. But they did get the cages around the nests. As I mentioned, the bird survival is threatened by human disturbance because they share the same sandy beaches that everybody wants to go to for the summer. And also there's a lot of grooming of beaches that are used for human activities, because to clean them up, to make sure they're clean, to take away natural vegetation and that. But this is exactly the opposite thing that is needed by the birds. They need the natural vegetation to hide from predators, and they can't really share the beach very well. So one of the things they do is they fence off a part of the beach. They get the local school kids to do these signs about that the area is closed. Now there's a lot of controversy about this because many beachgoers and local businesses aren't happy when part of the beach is closed. But this shows you this circular area is the part of the beach that was closed, and this is the extent of the beach. So the human beings have most of it, and they actually aren't entirely excluded from this area, but they just there's closed off, there's restricted areas. So this has been an ongoing issue with these places, but they're trying to coexist. They have this program called Piping Plover Guardians, and these are volunteers that observe and monitor the birds. They keep track of them. They get quite invested in it. A lot of the chicks die, and the volunteers are really upset when they come out one morning and they find all the chicks are given names. And when they find that the chick can't be found, or sometimes they're found dead, they get quite upset because they kind of think of them as their babies. One of the things they do is try to educate the public, to explain the program, to explain why the beach is closed, and also to gently enforce the restrictions to make sure people aren't trying to get into the restricted area. Unfortunately, in 2020, the volunteer program was completely shut down because of the pandemic. And they are a bit concerned about what the long-term effect that might be on the volunteer program, because they really do depend on these people to help out with the program. And finally, you get the chicks are hatched and they start running. They literally hit the ground running. They can feed themselves right away. They don't need the parents to feed them. So they start running all over the beach. And despite the pandemic, they had a fairly good year at Wasaga Beach. They had eight chicks who fledged from 7 pairs, and which was actually a little better than 2019 because there was a lot of flooding in 2019 that really damaged the nests. Shooting these birds is really tough because they're tiny, they're fuzzy, and they're fast, and they are so well camouflaged. If you look at their backs, if they're sitting in the sand, you simply cannot tell them apart from the sand. So they are an enormous challenge to get good pictures of. And of course, you also are restricted in the distance that you keep to them because you have to stay behind the barriers. However, once the chicks start running around, they don't pay any attention to the barriers. So this little guy came barreling out from the barrier, from behind the barrier. The blue thing is a mat that they'd put down on the sand for people to walk on. And he came barreling out right in front of me and gave me about 3 seconds to get off a burst of shots before he did a quick 180 and back he went. So that's kind of what you're up against, but sometimes you get lucky. So now we're going to go to Lake Ontario. We're coming down the home stretch here. Lake Ontario, west of Peterborough. So we're going to talk about Humber Bay Park, east and west, Tommy Thompson Park, Lynn Shores Conservation Area, and Thixon Woods. These are all west of Peterborough. And Humber Bay Park is just west of the downtown area of Toronto. It is a beautiful place, one of my favorite places to shoot, but it is a pain to get to because one way or another, you have to negotiate the traffic around Toronto. And so it's just kind of difficult, but it's worth, and it's really a full day trip. It's about almost an hour and 3/4 to get there from Peterborough. That's partly because of the traffic issues, but it's really worth it. So you have 2 peninsulas here. These are both human constructed peninsulas. They have a number of trails all through this area here with great access to the lake. There is a footbridge between them, so you can drive around if you want to, but you don't have to. You can walk across. And one area this area here is particularly productive because it has a floating footbridge right through the middle of this lagoon, which really provides you with an enormous amount of access to all of the birds. And this is a really protected area. Protected from waves and wind and snow and whatever. So you get a lot of birds coming in there and you have a really good front row seat along here. The only problem is that it is a floating boardwalk and you get joggers and you get cyclists who come barreling through. You're standing there trying with all your muscles locked, trying to keep your camera steady, and you can be absolutely certain that a cyclist or a jogger is going to come by and bounce the bridge on you. So that is one thing you have to kind of keep an eye out for. So again, there's a real diversity of wildlife, waterfowl and songbirds, minks, muskrats, turtles. These pictures were all taken from the boardwalk area, mostly on nice days. I got really lucky a couple of times when I went out there. Well, I always try to make sure I go out there on nice days. So these were all taken in the boardwalk, from the boardwalk. One of the big attractions every spring and summer are the redneck grebes who nest in the park, and they nest in that lagoon right in front of the boardwalk, which is great. For a period of time, the park officials had actually put out these wooden platforms to help the grebes build their nests. And so they would bring all of the debris and the twigs and everything and put them into these wooden platforms. Um, and many people who live in the area, this is the boardwalk here, many people who live in the area would come every day. This lady here, she adopted for years, she adopted every clutch of grebes that was born as her grandchildren. She was there all the time. So they after a while though, they stopped using these wooden platforms. So the birds form monogamous pairs in April or May, and then they start nesting. And it's very entertaining to watch them. They go through this elaborate and highly vocal courting rituals and nest building through April and May. Um, and then, as I said, at some point, the park decided not to put out the wooden platforms anymore. I'm not quite sure why, but maybe the idea was to let the grebes nest more naturally. So they did cobble together this nest of debris basically on top of a submerged tree trunk, but it was pretty precarious. And these nests sometimes would get washed out and they'd have to start over again. This one was successful, however. It has four eggs in there. And both parents incubate the eggs for roughly a month until they hatch. So these are the chicks, and they're very entertaining. They're so cute, and they are just kind of nuts. And they love to ride around. For the first 2 weeks or so, they ride around on their parents' back. And sometimes they hide right in the feathers, and sometimes they're right up front. The parents feed the chicks for about 2 months. Now, if they have more than one set of chicks in the season, they'll stop feeding the older ones and encourage them to become more independent, and they will transfer to feeding the younger ones as they come along. So this little video will just show you a bit of what it's like with these. They do this yawning thing all the time. I don't know what that's about. So this is the mother. She's trying to get, the father is sitting on the nest. There's one egg. And she wants him to get up so that she can sit for a while instead of carting the kid around. And he doesn't want to, but she keeps persisting. And so finally, he gives up and he leaves. Now they can't walk on ground very well. Their hips are hinged for swimming. So they're kind of awkward on land. And so finally she comes around again and takes a great leap, which I don't know if the chick was expecting that. And so he decides and they do this little pecking at the nest just to kind of clean things up. So I think he's going to bail in a minute here. Yeah, he just climbs off. He's decided he's had enough of that. And off he goes. In the wooded areas of Humber Bay, you get, again, a wide range of different types of songbirds. These are fairly common ones. You do get some rare ones coming in, but the waterfowl tend to be the more unusual ones. But still, there's quite a variety of songbirds that come into the wooded areas there. And you also get the mammals and reptiles as well. This is a mink, which looked like it's been through a few wars. a muskrat, and the snapping turtle. Snapping turtles are Canada's largest turtles, and they're classified as a species of special concern. It takes 15 to 20 years for them to mature, so any mortality along the way has quite a devastating effect on their population. And one of the biggest problems they have is, of course, crossing roads. I remember one time driving along a road just south of Peterborough here when I saw one of these turtles trying to cross the road. So I pulled the car over, I got out, tried to herd him to the side because it was a busy road. And a few other cars came by and they saw what was going on, so they all stopped and let me get this guy over to the side of the road. So I'm pretty sure he would have been toast if he had stuck on his path. One of the things that's great about Humber Bay is it's a great place for shooting in the winter. The water stays open for most of the season. There are ice patches in various locations, but it does provide open water for the waterfowl to feed. And so it attracts a lot of wild waterfowl because they can't feed through solid ice. So they tend to come into these areas. And so you see a lot of quite a wide variety of different waterfowl coming in, like this red-headed duck, which was scouting among the ice flows for crayfish. So again, and this picture was also taken from the boardwalk, so it gave me a really good view of that. Now, this was an unusual and probably unprecedented encounter. I noticed all of these rock cairns along here, and this wasn't all of them. There was probably a dozen more. And at the far end was this gentleman here. His name's Peter Rydell, and this is what he does. He builds these rock sculptures, and there's nothing except gravity holding these rocks together. They are all he just picks up rocks from the shore. He looks at their structure. He'll stand there for like 20 minutes looking at this rock, trying to figure out how he needs to place it so that it will balance properly. And as I said, he built like over a dozen of these things. It was kind of amazing to watch him working. He was just placing the top rock, and it took him about 20 minutes to do it. He was hanging on to it for about 20 minutes. And look at this one here. It's on an angle, and it's just, you think that thing would fall over in no time flat, but it didn't. They all just stayed like that. It was kind of amazing to see that. Next on the list is Tommy Thompson Park, a fabulous place. It is also a constructed wetland with trails, lagoons, and beaches. It has limited hours because during weekdays, during the day, it's full of trucks because they actually are still building. This is known as the Leslie Street Spit. They actually are still building this thing. So they're bringing out fill all the time. So you can only go during from 4 to 9 p.m. on weekdays, and then the weekends and holidays you can go in there. And you have the parking is up here, and you have again woods and meadows up here, then a walk along the lake and the lagoons and marshes, and more woods and beaches down in this area. So this red line is the multi-use trail. This is a wide paved trail, not only for pedestrians, but bikes can be used in here as well. And then you have pedestrian trails, which are the yellow ones, which are a little, they're more natural, but they're fairly well defined. And then the nature trails are a little more rough. This is an important bird area. It is a critical stopover for birds as migrating across the lake. They have a nature center there, so they have various programs that go on. So that's something, again, you could take a look at to see what they have on offer. So this is often called a superhighway, a bird superhighway. They have more than 300 recorded species. So they do counting, monitoring, banding birds during migration, but they also, a number of birds nest on the island or on the spit. So they track the nests. They try to find every nest on the island, and they study the breeding productivity. So they have a really extensive record of breeding success. And they also, through this nature center, they also run public education and school programs as well. So they get really interesting birds like all these different scarlet tanager and the warbling vireo. These are again things that are it's not impossible to find these birds in the Peterborough area, but they're not as common as they are in these locations. These are more common birds, the Baltimore oriole. The bobolink is classified as threatened in Canada, and you get a lot of warblers coming through in the spring migration. During the winter, it's a good place to see owls. There are about 10 species that have been recorded. Some of them come regularly in the winter, but others are species that are more rare that come when food is scarce further north. So this is a good place to watch for owls, especially the snowy owls. And they're also hawks. Now, I'll just full disclosure here, these pictures are mine, but they were not taken in Tommy Thompson Park because I have never been brave enough to go there in the wintertime. But these are the types of species that you can find there. Now, one thing that I really wanted to do when I went was to go right down to this area here at the far end from the parking lot. And thank God I didn't know how long it was. It was about 4 kilometers. And honestly, if I'd known it was that long, that far, I probably wouldn't have gone. But I was very glad that I did. One thing that was interesting was that about halfway down here, there's a section where the path breaks because there's actually water there. And they have this floating pedestrian bridge. And this can be a problem because it can be taken out in high water. And this is the most direct route to the farthest end of the spit. I think theoretically you could detour around like this, but it would be, I think, quite difficult to do that. So anyway, I went all the way out to the end because in those woods at the far end, they get hundreds of egrets, great egrets, pairs, building nests in the trees. And so they form monogamous pairs and they build these nests quite high in the trees. The male starts building the nest and invites a female to come in and see his etchings. And then they have between 1 and 6 eggs, which are incubated by both adults. And they feed the young, as many of these types of birds do, through regurgitation. Generally speaking, once they have set up the nest, the male and female build it together. And I saw this at the time that they were building the nest, and I wanted to go back to see the chicks, but by the time that came, which would have been a month or so later, that pedestrian bridge had been washed out, and there was no access to that part of the spit. This is also an area where you get intermingling between those egrets and the black crowned night herons. Again, hundreds of them in the trees making nests. The male starts to build the nest, which is kind of a platform of sticks and twigs and other bits and pieces, which he finds on the ground. Or you can often see them trying to pull quite large branches off the trees. So the male advertises for a female, and once he's found a mate, the male continues collecting material, but he tends to pass it to the female who works it into the nest. They both incubate the eggs and brood the chicks, and the young leave the nest about 1 month after they come out of the eggs. Now, this little video will show you this process of the male bringing a twig and giving it to the female she's in charge of home decor. So he gives it to her to decide what to do with it, except he's not quite sure that he doesn't know better. So this is what happens. First of all, it's quite awkward because these are quite large twigs and branches. So he has a little bit of a problem getting it through the door. And then so he hands it to her, but he kind of wants to put it where he wants to put it. And she says, no, that's the wrong place. So she's moving it around, and she's very fastidious. She's going to put it exactly where it should be, but watch what happens to the branch in front of it. So he's telling her to get on with it, and the branch falls off. And he looks at that and he says, do you know what I had to do to bring that twig home? So this is the ongoing drama of domestic life for the black-crowned night heron. So now we're going on to Lynn Shores Conservation Area. I know quite a few of our members have probably been out there. This is the main part of this is out near Oshawa. This is the main part of the park. The main entrance comes off of Highway 22, but I tend to prefer to go to this area here, down to Halls Road, because it provides quite good access to this marsh area. And you can also, down in this area here, you've got a lookout that goes in here, and you've also got access to the beach in this area as well. So this is what the lookout is like. You do have even though you're close to the marsh, it's a big marsh, and often the distance is great. You do absolutely need a long lens to be shooting here for sure. So this is the outlook over the marsh. This is the view of, this is the lookout in this area right here. And so there's this wooded area in here and another wooded area in here. So you get this is a Cooper's hawk, and you get this is palm warbler and a cedar waxwing. So you get the songbirds, you get the hawks in this area, in the wooded areas, and even the occasional mammal as well. And this area here is down between the marsh. There's a little area of land, sandy beach, between the marsh and the lake. At least there was. The last I heard, this was washed out by high water, and I'm not sure how accessible it is. But this is an area that I really, really like, because you're literally right with your feet in the marsh. And so you're able to get really good close-up shots of a lot of the water birds that come in. And you get some of the shorebirds as well. So this sanderling would either seem to be asleep or bobbing. He was strange. And so you get different types of shorebirds in that area as well. There's a lot of mixture of sandy areas, water, vegetation, very marshy area. Just down the road, so Lynn Shores is over here. So just down the road, about 10 minutes, is Thixon Woods. And that's actually a good name for it. I mean, I presume it's donated land. I presume the name Thixon is from that, but it's actually a good name because this is a very, very dense, thick wooded area. And then they have another area over here, which is newer, and it's a little more open. It's more meadowy, and it has bushes and things, some trees, but this is a fairly open area, a meadow type area. You can also walk along, this is private property. These are houses here, but you can walk along this road along the beach. And there's also a trail that goes down over here toward the lake. So there's a lot of different ecosystems there that attract different types of animals. In the woods, in the thick woods, this is what your experience will mostly be like. It's a very challenging place to shoot. The birds hide among the thick tangled branches. Light is very low in there, so it's challenging. But if you have enough patience, you eventually get rewarded. So I did manage to get these shots in those woods. And this just gives you a little sense of what these are flickers. I hope you can hear them. Hear his call. There might have been a time lag with that sound. When I did the test run, the sound seemed to lag, but I hope you're able to hear his call. The next down the road is Darlington Provincial Park, and we're getting close to due south of Peterborough here, so this is not very far away, about an hour maybe, well, 45 minutes to an hour. It's quite a large wooded area here, but I spend most of my time when I'm there on this beach. It is a public beach that people use for swimming and sunbathing and picnicking and all the rest of it. But you get a number of different types of shorebirds. This is a killdeer with some of its chicks. They are very used to people, so you can get quite close to them. They don't pay any attention to you. This is a common tern that was on the beach there. And this is another of the piping plover conservation program areas. And so if you don't want to drive all the way to Wasaga Beach, um, Darlington is closer, and it's exactly the same type of program. They do exactly the same thing. They don't close off the entire beach. They leave a stretch here, but most people don't use this anyway because this is mostly pebbles and that. It's not a sand beach that they use for swimming and sunbathing. Um, and they have a guardian program just like they do in Wasaga. There's lots of people who come over to the guardians and ask about what's going on and ask them to explain the program and that sort of thing. And they do the same monitoring and observations of the birds. What happens is as soon as the chicks are born, the female takes off. She says, I'm done. I'm completed my work. So she leaves the male to take care of them until they fledge later on. And one of the things that he has to do is brood them towards sunset because they don't have good temperature control. So there's like 3, maybe 4 of them tucked underneath him here. So this is one of the chicks coming, and again, they're hard to see against the sand. One of the chicks coming to him, and he has this call. So that's come to me. And they do, and he broods them. Now, I observed something one day when I was there that I asked the scientists about, and they couldn't explain it. This adult male was chasing one of the chicks all afternoon, relentlessly chasing this chick all over the beach. The chick was running away from him. It was hiding under a log, but he kept after him. And at one point, he actually attacked the chick. You can just barely see him here. He grabbed him by the leg and upended him. And he started pecking at him furiously. After a while, he let him go. And I thought he'd killed the chick, but the chick just lay there for a little bit. And then it got up and ran away. And it appeared to be perfectly fine. And I asked the biologists, what was that all about? And they really didn't know. They thought possibly that the chick was being too adventurous and the parent was trying to explain to him that it's a dangerous world out there. But that was just kind of an off the top theory. I never could get an answer to why this was happening. This is just an example of when they're really little and he's trying to flap his little nubs there. And this is when he's fledged, when he's just reaching, this is the end of the summer, when he's just reaching the stage of being able to fly. So that is the growth that occurs during this, from the spring to the summer. Okay, we have a few more to go here. Port Hope, Cobourg, Nawaton, Presqu'île, Prince Edward County, and Amherst Island. And I'm going to try to get through these really quickly. The Sculthorpe Marsh, Port Hope, is really a good place. It is over on, this is the harbor over here. It's over on this side here. Again, probably a few of you have been there over time. There's a marsh there with a boardwalk, and there's a wooded area and a creek over in this area here. This is a great place when there are green herons there. You can often see them quite well. And this is, they hunt in the marsh. They use their feet to stir up the water, which causes the prey to move. And they, that's how they find them because the water is full of mud, so I can't really see anything. And so we just found him, and they keep dipping their prey in water. I assume it's because they need to lubricate it, because they do swallow the prey whole. So they need to lubricate it, and then they swallow it down eventually. And this was quite an interesting thing where he actually captures a dragonfly out of the air. And I'd never seen that before. Would have been nice if he turned around at that point, but of course you never get everything you want. But it was quite interesting to see him grab that. great egrets show up there as well. And they're again, you can get pretty good close access to them until the reeds get too high. And they're trouble to shoot though sometimes, especially if you get too close, because when they're hunting, they crouch down, and so they're quite compact while they're hunting for food. But as soon as they've done that, they stretch out, and they're like over 6 feet or 7 feet or 8 feet tall, and all of a sudden they're out of the frame. So trying to keep them in the frame is one of the big problems with these birds. Great place for belted kingfishers, which are notoriously hard to shoot. They're very skittish. They don't generally like being around people, but they don't seem to have a big problem with that at Sculthorpe. And they often come back to the same trees, so it's a really good place to try and get them. And in the Gage Creek area, you get waterbirds, shorebirds. This is a kind of pebbly mudflat type of beach area. So you get a lot of sandpipers in there. This is not a lump of dirt, of mud. It is a snapping turtle crawling through the mud. And he was having a great time. A muskrat eating a reed and some bullfrogs. So you get a variety of other critters there as well. They've had a lot of problems with the boardwalk. It was right along the South Shore. It was right next to the lake, and twice in recent years, it got absolutely devastated by high water levels and storms. And they repaired it the first time in 2017. And after the same thing happened in 2019, they said no more. So they're going to reroute it to the north side because they can't just keep fixing it. It just was totally wiped out. Coburg, and again, I know a lot of people have been there, so I'll get through this fairly quickly. Again, a variety of ecosystems, beaches, meadows, forested areas, and then the marina area. It's a great place for waterfowl. You do get a variety of waterfowl here. Some that are not all that common, like this horned grebe and this whimbrel, which caused a fair bit of a stir when it came in because it's not that common to see it there. The red-breasted mergansers and the long-tailed ducks are very common there, and you can get good views of them. They're often in the marina area. Great place for shooting in the winter time because, again, inside the marina area, it doesn't fully ice over. So it's good for winter shooting because, again, it has open water, which attracts a fairly wide range of waterfowl during the winter time. But they do have their problems, as do we all. It's not doesn't look very easy getting around in this environment. So you have to kind of walk fairly gingerly. And this next one coming up is All of Us at one time. I'm sure you recognize yourself in this. Yeah, he's having he's having a bit of a problem. A couple of years ago, well, several years ago, there was such a cold winter that 95% of the Great Lakes froze over. And the birds all along the lakes, not on just Ontario, but I think Erie as well, were starving because they had nowhere to feed. So people in communities all along the lakes went out to feed these animals, but most municipalities have bylaws against feeding wildlife. Some of the municipalities kind of, temporarily turned a blind eye to this because of the dire circumstances, but Coburg didn't, and they fined these people repeatedly for going out to feed these birds during the winter. Just wanted to mention that there's a place called the Peace Park about 10 minutes from the marina. There's a creek that goes through here and a little sort of marine park area, which can be quite an interesting place to try your luck shooting. So it's just in this area here. Now, Watton Nature Reserve, this is one of my favorite places. This is about 20 minutes down the road from Coburg. It's not a private place, but it's not like an official conservation area or a park or a provincial park or anything. It has a very mixed ecosystem environment, two big marshes, woods with trails, the beach area, parking in two locations here. Very accessible, very easy walking, very accessible. In fact, this one little area here actually has a couple of chairs, which is a prime seating site for this everything going on in the marsh. And it's just great to sit there and let all of the critters come to you. So again, often a good place for green herons. This was right in front of me. He was hunting in the marsh there. This was quite interesting. I didn't know at first what he was doing. He was hanging onto this branch with his legs and bending right down to the surface of the water. And he has this little white thing here, which I think is a feather. It turns out that the green heron is one of the few birds that uses tools. And basically, he uses feathers or little twigs or little bits of debris as bait for fish. He sort of rattles them over the surface of the water, and the fish will come up to the surface, and then he'll attack the fish. So this is an example of tool using by one of these birds. Very interesting to watch him do this. He would hang upside down like this for like half an hour without moving. Mute swans nest in this area. So this is a place where you can see, again, the life cycle of the swans. They start nesting, they have the chicks, and it goes through the whole summer. The parents don't feed the cygnets. They lead them to food, and they stir up the vegetation and sort of pull it up from the depths. And this gives the cygnets a chance to get the food and learn how to do it. So this goes on for most of the summer. And so they just pick the stuff off the surface until they get older and are able to dig down a little bit deeper themselves. Other denizens of this marsh, the black crowned night heron showed up. Always a great blue heron there somewhere. Grackles were nesting in a nest box right beside that little sitting area. So I got really good close-up view of them begging for food from mom. Great place for insects, shooting insects. And there's usually a beaver around and some turtles as well. So there's a lot of variety as well. Presqu'île Park, I know this is a favorite of a lot of the members. So this is the peninsula down near just south of Brighton. Again, varied ecosystems. So there's at least 338 species of birds have been spotted within the park, and 130 species are known to nest. So they have a lot of special events around these different times, the migrations and other things going on. The beaches and the Owen Point and Gull Island. So Owen Point is this area here, and this is Gull Island. They're not really attached. I mean, they look like they are, but you can't get to the beach from walking along here. You have to go back on the road and drive around. This can be a very difficult area to access in the spring. If there's a lot of high water or snow melt, it can turn into quite a swamp. So during the breeding season, there's no people can walk out to Gull Island. It's shallow water here. You need waders, but you can walk out there, but it's not allowed during breeding season. So there are restrictions on when you can do that. Variety of different types of shorebirds that are up by the point. It's quite a busy area most of the time. They're in the surf, and they're on the mud flats and on the sandy beaches there. Sometimes the beach area over where the actual public beaches where people go to swim and sunbathe gets flooded during high water. And this creates all kinds of pools all over the sandy beach. And this draws in huge numbers of shorebirds. They flock to the beach. And they're not afraid of humans. So this is great for close access shooting. You get a really front row seat to seeing them doing this. They are challenging though, because they move very fast. And they make these erratic movements, these bouncy movements, and they turn on a dime and they jab things here and there, and it's just really a challenge trying to shoot this movement. Especially, it's especially true when they're doing this little bathing routine that they do. Um, Normally, it's not too difficult to get some reasonably good shots with burst shooting, but you never know when they're going to do this little jumping thing. So that's always a bit tricky. A lot of terns also on the beach. This one here is either a non-breeding male or a juvenile, so hence the different coloration. Unfortunately, one of these had a really bad situation. It's a little hard to see, but he has a fishing line caught in his beak, and it trails all the way down to his feet, which are tangled around both feet. And my friend and I, when we saw this, we called the park and told them about this bird, and they did go out and look for it to try to rescue it. But they couldn't find it for several days, and by the time they did, he was dead because he couldn't fly and he couldn't feed. So this is one of the problems with these fishing lines. It's really quite deadly for birds. So in Presqu'île, you have this wooded area this is the Owen Point over here. So there's woods in here, and then woods and trails throughout the whole central part of the peninsula. Again, you get the typical types of songbirds that you find in wooded areas, quite a wide variety there. Owls you can find in the park. I saw my first pileated woodpecker there. This one kind of fascinated me. It was a frog sitting there quite happily with a wasp sitting on his back. So they seem to be quite copacetic. Along the lakeshore here, you get good access to seeing the water and lake access here and here. It is private property in this area here. There are a couple of places that maintain gardens and bird feeders, where one particularly over in this area where people are allowed to go in, and you can get quite a wide variety of different songbirds in that area. Along that southern shore, you have access to the lake, visions of the lake, and get some shots there. This is a paved road, and so you get both cars and also a lot of cyclists as well in this area. And there's lots of different scenic views of the lake that you can get at different times of the day. The shores along there are quite rocky, pebbly, and they're covered with mussels, zebra mussels and other types of mussels. So it attracts some of these shorebirds that like to crack open the shells and dig out the mussels. Prince Edward County, great place. The entire southern coast of this area is an important bird area. The main focus is the bird observatory right on the end of the tip of the island or the peninsula. You have the bird observatory is here. You have a wooded area here with trails, all these types of trails going through. And you can also walk around this area here out to the other side. And this is a wooded area with swampy, boggy area as well. And this is also good for songbirds and other types of, mostly songbirds more than shorebirds. Oh, sorry. So this is what it looks like. Some of the trails are closed because they have the mist nets out to capture the birds. And there's a little bird banding hut, which you can take a look at what they're doing. You can take a look at the birds and see how they're banding them, that sort of thing, similar to the other locations. Get some great birds there. The scarlet tanagers are really, really beautiful. And the towhees are also very striking birds. This one was quite a rare bird, apparently. It's a hooded warbler, not very common in this area. I saw him on a branch in perfect light for about 3 seconds. Before I could even press the shutter button, he was gone. And about 2 minutes later, I saw him captured in the net. So I was able to get a shot of him in the net. And when the bander came to take him out, I was able to get a close-up shot. But I would have preferred to get him in perfect light perched on a nice little branch. But this is not a common bird, so I was glad to have the images. this is the bird observatory down here. And up in this area here is a wooded area that is absolutely fabulous for warblers during the spring migration. They're just all over the place there, and you can often get quite close to them. The downside is this is an extremely boggy, muddy place in the spring if there's been rain or snow melt or lots of high water. Well, actually, not high water because it is up high above the water. But if you get a lot of snow melt, you really need really good, solid, waterproof boots. And sometimes it's actually impassable in May, which is when you want to be there. So these are just a few others of the warblers. I just had such a wonderful day that day. I got practically every warbler I've ever shot that one day in that location, and the light was great, and the birds were cooperating, so I was happy. Also, you get quite a few insects, the painted butterflies and the red admiral. And this is the last one, you'll be glad to know, Amherst Island. We're almost out to Kingston. And this is, you have to go out to Millhaven and then take a ferry across to the town of Stella on Amherst Island. It's about 20 minutes, 20, 30 minutes or so. So you can drive around these roads, and there's a series of roads all through here. This is mostly farm fields. And there's this area here called Owl Woods, which I'll talk about in a minute. Mainly what people are interested in out in the fields are the snowy owls. And if you get, there's a lot of them there if you get a season, what's known as an eruption, which is a huge number of owls. Unlike a lot of the other owls, snowy owls hunt in the open fields, and they are active during the day. They hunt during the day. Most owls sleep during the day and hunt at night. So it is easier in one respect to get shots of snowy owls, but they are still quite elusive. I couldn't believe my luck on the first day I was there. This one was sitting on this big bird box right beside the road. And I've never had better luck ever since. Once you get to Owl Woods, which is in this area here, you can see a wide variety of other owls. So this is the boreal owl, the barred owl, and the saw-whet owl. And there's others there as well. This can be difficult to get to, though, because this road in here is not it's not like a paved road that's well maintained. It's a very rough track. And you're there in the wintertime, and if the snow is heavy, you can't drive in there. The first time I went with some people and we were able to drive in, but a lot of times you can't, and you have to walk in. And it's not that long a walk from the two main roads, about 15, 20 minutes, but it depends on what the conditions are like, how deep the snow is. And it can be extremely icy in the woods as well. So you have to be very, very careful when you're in there because it can be quite treacherous. They sleep in the woods during the day. And so that's one reason why the people who own the woods, half of it is privately owned and the other half is run by the Kingston field ornithologists. And they are quite unhappy about the misbehavior of a lot of people who come in there. They make noise, they talk loudly, they use flash cameras, they harass the owls, trying to wake them up. And at times they have threatened to shut the woods to public access. As far as I know, that hasn't happened, but there is a lot of concern about that. And just finally, and this is the last, this is a phenomenon that I never knew about when I saw this is a saw-whet owl. And owls eat their prey, mice primarily, or small rodents. They eat them whole. They eat everything, the tails, the bones, everything. And the parts that are not digestible, their digestive system compacts it into kind of a lump of coal. And then they expel it through their mouth. And this is actually something that scientists look at to study what they're eating. I didn't know anything about this when this one started coughing up this big black lump of coal. And it was very dark in there. I wasn't sure I was going to get it at all, but it was quite interesting. And then after that, I was able to find out about what that was all about. Okay, I have tested your patience. I just want to wish you all a safe and happy holiday, and that's the end of my presentation. And if you can endure, we can do a question period. But maybe you'd like a little break first. I don't know. I'll pass it back to Linda or Guy.
Okay, thanks very much, Lydia. That was excellent. And I was fascinated by the whole thing. Like I say, I don't do bird photography, but it always gives me an appreciation of what it takes to get great shots like that. So thank you very much for that.
I'm going to stop the share so I can get back on board here. Okay. All right. Okay. If I haven't exhausted you, I'm glad to answer any questions you might have.
That
would
was
have
fabulous, Lydia. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was really good, Lydia.
Really interesting.
Yep.
I love the photography as well. It was just phenomenal. It really was.
I had to dig through thousands of pictures over about 6 years to get all that stuff. So
On your bird, I'll just ask a question. I'm sorry, I'm going through and I'm trying to unmute people here. So
That's
just
what I thought that would do.
No,
But
want to ask questions.
still a few people that are muted.
Yeah, I'm trying to get them to unmute. Oh, well. Please raise your hand if you've got any issues. One of the questions that I've got is, again, your photography is fantastic. Do you do a lot of post-processing on your birds? Like we might crop a little bit, or what is it that you do?
Yeah, I do. I shoot raw, and I do not let the camera do any processing whatsoever. So when I get it into the computer, I want to be able to control the processing myself. So I do, but basically, it's the type of processing designed to create the image that my eye saw. Okay, and in terms of the colors and that sort. I mean, sometimes I do like special effects. Sometimes when I put things in the slideshow, I will do a special effect of some sort or other. But if I'm doing it, mostly my first step is to just basically create the basic image without anything too fancy, so that I can then later I can save that and I can do that. I can do things to it later on. One of the reasons for that is that if I want to submit images to a magazine, for example, they have rules about how much post-processing you can do. A lot of contests also do. And so you can't do cloning, for example. You can't do any type of extreme processing. They just want you to do standard processing. So that's what I do as the first step. And then I've got it saved, and then I can do other things with them. And that's one of the reasons to shoot with RAW, because it gives you that flexibility.
Lydia, do you always take a tripod with you, or how much do you use a tripod versus handheld?
About 1% of the time, and then only grudgingly.
Okay.
I understand the value of tripods, but I have enough trouble carrying 2 cameras with 2 long lenses. And there's only rare circumstances in which I'm willing to pack a tripod with me. If I know I'm going to be in a one location that I'm not moving, and I have a set target that isn't going to change, like a bird, like my osprey on the nest, for example, or some of those heron shots where if I'm going to be shooting video, I do shoot video handheld, but I do try to use a tripod if I want to shoot video, because it is extremely difficult to hold the long lens steady enough to shoot video. So some of those pictures of that picture of the green heron grabbing the frog out of the marsh, that was shot on a tripod.
Okay.
But the other one of the problems with tripods is, for me personally, is that it reduces your flexibility in tracking, because I mean, some people can do it and do it with very expensive gimbal ball heads, but when a bird takes off suddenly, or it's flying around, or it's jumping here, jumping there, you need the flexibility to move, and that is more difficult with a tripod.
So do your lenses or any number of your lenses use image stabilization within the lens? Or?
Yes, both of the lenses have image stabilization in the lens, and I also have it in my camera,
Oh,
and
okay.
they work together.
Hmm,
The
okay.
image stabilization gives me 6 stops.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Hmm.
It's not a Nikon.
Oh, and it's not a Canon, I'll tell you that.
Well, I just heard Brian there, so sorry, Brian. Any other questions?
Yeah, some of the new Tamrons, you can, I just bought the 24 to 70 f2.8 Tamron, and you can get 5 stops out of that lens alone. The Tamron image stabilization is amazing.
Yeah, but that's not a lens I would use for wildlife. I have a
Yeah.
300 that I use with a 1.4 teleconverter or a 2 times teleconverter, and the other one is a 40 to 150, which I always use with the teleconverter, and those are barely long enough.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah.
I have the Tamron 150 to 600
Yes, that would be good.
on a crop frame camera that is equal to 900 millimeters.
Hmm.
Yeah, yeah. It's pretty, I have it. I totally agree with you. You can't put a tripod down and put a camera on top of it and expect to get a bird to sit there while you take a picture.
Well, you can sometimes. That heron did a pretty good job, and the osprey on the nest was I could manage it. But yeah, if you've got something that's actively moving around, then it's just no way.
Yeah. I got a place near Grafton. I've been there a couple of times. My brother lives down in Coburg, and we saw mute swans down there too. That little area, it's tiny, but there's just so much wildlife in there. It's incredible.
Yep.
Yeah.
You mentioned you were talking about Nawatin, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really a hidden gem. I've spent many days there, and it just I mean, it's like everywhere else. It's the luck of the draw, what's going to show up that day, but it has been very productive. And it's close too. You can get there in less than an hour.
Yeah.
So, it's for a relatively sane investment of time, there's a pretty good return.
I think we've come to the end of the question period, and we've had a long night anyway. So thanks, Lydia, again. And it's the first time I've seen a fly fishing heron, which is kind of interesting. And,
Yes, exactly. And I think he probably, what do you call, tied it himself.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Somebody after my own heart. We will, don't forget, next month is going to be an early meeting at 4 o'clock, and we will send out some warnings.
Right?
Yeah, we'll send out some warnings well ahead of time to make sure we don't miss this spectacular speaker from England. And I guess that's it for the meeting. All have a great Christmas, and please be safe.